So my name's Jamie. Some people online may know me as Nettles and Petals. And I kind of got into gardening by accident, to be honest. So I originally studied fine art, and that was kind of where I met a couple of garden designers, and I did a collaboration with a couple of garden designers. I was doing more of the mural painting, they obviously were doing the garden design, but being amongst those kind of people really influenced me. So I studied garden design myself as well, and really enjoyed that process. And in my artwork, I was inspired by the natural world anyway. So that always infused the work that I created. Yeah, being amongst those kind of people, I started to find out more about the ecological issues that we're facing. And that's what kind of eventually led me into regenerative agriculture, essentially, or horticulture and ecological growing. Just love it. It's just hands in the soil. Anxiety-wise, it's just, it really helps with all those types of things. I've had the bug ever since, I suppose. And then the online stuff, I started posting online maybe a few months ago. Was never really a sharer, but decided to post online a couple of times and ended up doing pretty well, so I've continued doing that, and people seem to get some value from what I'm putting out there, so I've really enjoyed doing that. We grow as many different varieties as possible, really. Try and keep the garden as biodiverse as we can. Summer at the moment, tomatoes, aubergines, courgettes, chilies, peppers, a few interesting things like Aztec broccoli, more or less everything. And we interplant everything with flowers if we can, draw in the pollinators. And yeah, biodiversity is one of our core principles, really, just to build the resilience of the garden. The garden's only a year old, so that pest-prey balance, well, the balance is balancing out. So we're doing everything we can to draw in all of the beneficials, really, to help with the pests that we have. Like we had wireworm this year, terrible wireworm. And it happens. I mean, when you mess with the cycles of nature, you're always going to have some kickback. And because I mean, wireworms lay their eggs within lawns. If you convert that lawn into a vegetable garden, then you've got them to deal with. And the only thing the roots of the plants. So the only thing they have to eat are the plants that you're planting. So it's an absolute nightmare. And they have a 6-year life cycle. So you don't know there's an issue. The plants look fine, then all of a sudden they drop and they're gone. So things like that, but there's ways to deal with that. You can, mustard is a great way to deal with them. You can cover crop mustard and then to kind of just incorporate into the top layer of the soil and acts as kind of a biofumigant, which is great. You can just dig them out when you see them. Nematodes, biological nematodes, you could use those if you needed to. But yeah, so there's always going to be pests, but we don't use any kind of pesticides, not even organic pesticides. We just try and draw in all the predatory insects, and we've got wildlife ponds to draw in. We've got resident toads in the polytunnels next door. Literally, I've left the courgettes in the corner just for it to live in. Like, honestly, it's got its own little house. So yeah, so we just try and create as biodiverse garden as we possibly can, and then it'll find its balance over time. It's harder to say the things that we haven't got growing than the things that we have, I suppose. So the location isn't ideal because we're on a north-facing hill that's about 30 degrees. But we kind of dealt with that by terracing it originally. We just hand terraced it and built the beds to the kind of market garden standard of 75 centimetre beds with 35 centimetre pathways. And that's in like a terrace system that we just did by hand. But employing the no-dig method really helps. And we've noticed that even though it's north-facing, we still can grow crops all the way through the winter, particularly in the polytunnels, but even outside. Really protecting the soil life really helps the plants to weather the cold winters on the coast, because we're only literally a stone's throw from the beach here as well, so we do get a lot of coastal weather. The garden was built with resilience in mind, so that's why we try and create as biodiverse garden as we can. But on top of that, we harvest all our own water. We've got 3 polytunnels that are 50 foot, and we harvest water from each of them. Because we're on a terrace system here, we can actually save water from each of the polytunnels. So we have, I think, about 7,000 litres, I think, something along of water retention capabilities, which is really good. It helped us definitely through the drought that we had earlier on this year, and last year actually. We use all our own wood chip we've got some woodland around here, so we use all our own wood chip to mulch the pathways. We've got a 6-bay compost system. So we create all of our own compost for the beds. We just add a small layer of mulch every year, and that's really the only fertility that we add, because we're a stone throws away from the sea. We use seaweed. We've got tons down there, so it's a great resource. We use that, create amendments, or we add it to the compost, or even as a mulch on the beds throughout autumn. It's a great mulch. It breaks down throughout autumn and feeds the soil, which then in turn feeds the plants. So it's a great system, and it's a great resource to have just down the road. We grow mainly heirloom and heritage varieties so that we can seed save. We can try and protect some heritage varieties that may be close to extinction, and we save a lot of money on seeds. And it also means that our plants can acclimatise to this area, which is important. So once you've grown a plant in your environment, then it acclimatises, and the next time you grow it using the seed that you've saved, it'll usually respond much better and grow much better. We also have bird houses around the perimeter, but they act as pest control as well, flying around the garden and dealing with a lot of the love butterflies, but they can be a nightmare sometimes, so we have a lot of wagtails that help with that. So when we originally set the garden up, we didn't have a fence, and that was a bit of a mistake, because we have some resident deer, which makes short work of your crops if left unchecked. So we learnt from that and put a fence up pretty quickly, which also helps with the rabbits as well. I mean, to be honest, it's a 5-foot fence, which wasn't quite big enough, but it acts as a deterrent, and we don't mind sharing now and again if they do jump it. One issue we do have is obviously surrounding us there are some monoculture farms, we end up dealing with their pests, which is not ideal. We don't really cover our brassicas all the way through winter, didn't cover our purple sprouting broccoli. It was perfect. It got to, I think, February, March this year, and in one night it was wiped out by about 30 or 40 pigeons, which I wasn't too happy about, but that's because we have a huge field of rapeseed just behind, and they were in there flying past and saw a nice snack, so I decided to swoop down, and we then covered it, and we did get some more side shoots, and it was fine. We don't mind sharing if we have to, and it's just one of those things you just kind of have to work with. So a day here would consist of turning up, making sure the deer haven't been in and eaten everything that we've got growing, just checking the garden generally. We do a harvest quite early on, especially in the summer when the temperatures are quite high. Always best to harvest things while it's a bit cooler. Yeah, we'll do a harvest, then usually plant things out. We successionally sow, so there's always, if something comes out, something else goes in straight after. Essentially relay cropping, really. There isn't really much gap between something coming out and something going in, and we sow and grow everything in trays, seed trays. We sow in those, and essentially that gives you a head start, because you can grow things on for 30 days in your containers and your seed trays. When something else is ready to come out, they go in. Most people would say weeding is part of their daily task list, but not here. We keep the soil structure intact, so it's no dig, but I mean, it's not no dig. There is some digging obviously involved, that you're replanting something, or you're taking something out, or you're pulling a carrot up. There's some kind of disturbance there, but it's all minimal. And soil disturbance is a natural process that happens in nature. We just try to limit as much as we possibly can. And by doing that, we just don't really have any weeds. I mean, there was an initial mulching layer, which is a decent layer of mulch to kind of suppress. But then after that, it's literally weeding doesn't even factor into a weekly task list. It's just now and again, if there's something there, obviously we get them, but it's very limited. So that really helps with, you can just spend the time doing things you like doing, harvesting and planting and cooking on the stove in the garden, or whatever it may be. Walking down to the beach and picking up some seaweed, pretending you're picking up seaweed, but actually go for a coffee on the beach or whatever. Not only does it stop us having to weed, it's amazing for the soil. We keep the soil structure intact, all the organisms that are living within there. We don't disturb them. They work symbiotically with the plants. We chop and drop sometimes, so whatever plant we have in a bed, we'll take it out, chop it up and add it to the bed again. Sometimes we cover crop or undersow with cover crops, so there's no real need for any additional fertilizers. In the summer we'll be watering, but again, keeping the soil structure intact. We don't need to water as much either. Mulching the pathways with wood chip just retains as much moisture as possible in the actual garden, so that really helps. As I say, through the drought that we had this year and last year, we really didn't suffer that much because we had the stored water on site and the mulch, which really helps. Most beds are full throughout the year. Some of them are cover crops throughout the winter, but more or less all of the beds in the garden will be full year round. The polytunnels are easier to deal with, I suppose, easier to grow in through the winter. And the other thing that we do, which really helps, which is a great tip that I learned from Elliot Coleman actually, was that if you're growing in a polytunnel, then add a second layer of fleece on the bed. So that double layer of protection really helps, and it raises the temperature underneath the second layer by quite a margin, and you can grow a lot more than you usually would be able to through the winter. So the polytunnels are always full, and throughout the winter, I mean, we've got things growing in seed trays now that will replace all of these summer crops. Winter purslane, a lot of winter greens. It's mainly winter greens that will be in the polytunnels. I'll have some purple sprouting broccoli in here, we'll have some celery in here, we'll have quite a diverse array of plants within the polytunnels. Outside, we'll have things like leeks, purple sprouting broccoli overwintering, we'll have garlic overwintering. Again, the garden is north facing, so it's not ideal for winter growing, but it's still manage it. I'd say my favourite crop to grow is quite mainstream, and it's tomatoes. I'm sorry, it just is. They're just so much fun to grow, and I always grow 20 plus varieties. So I have my core staples that I grow every single year, but then I also add maybe 10 new ones every year just to try them out really. So yeah, it's quite mainstream, but it is one of my favorite things to grow. But I'd say that chard was actually on the list too. I love chard, and it is undervalued as a crop, I find. I never don't have chard in the garden, all the way through winter, all the way through summer, and I'll sow multiple successions of it throughout the year. But it's just great. Small leaves, big leaves, the stalks can be used like celery, you know, it is one of those crops that is just a staple for me. Crops that I don't directly grow, that I really value here on the site are what we call weeds predominantly, which they're not actually out of place because I want them there, so they're not actually weeds. There's woodland around here, so we do tons of foraging. It's hard when you do that and you look at the nutritional value of the things that you forage compared to the things that you grow, and actually find that the weeds, there's far more nutritional value in those than there are in the things that you're growing. So it's hard. Nature does it best. We just try and mimic it in the best way that we can, I suppose. And flowers is one of those things that I didn't grow a huge amount of, but once you see the benefits that they bring to the garden by introducing them, yeah, I add them everywhere. You've got your standard ones, marigolds and your calendula, and I think there's maybe 30 different varieties in the garden at the moment. It'll end up being a flower garden as opposed to a vegetable garden. I'd say my main tip for beginners just coming into gardening, or they've just found a love for gardening, or they want to get into gardening, would be to start with the soil. Honestly, it was something that I neglected when I first started growing. You kind of focus on the plants and not the soil, but that's where the magic happens. It happens in the soil. We don't even really grow plants. We just facilitate the growth of plants. Focusing on the soil would be my primary advice to anybody who's starting out. And once you start there, everything else is much easier. So that, along with utilising the no-dig method, for sure. Why dig? I find it crazy now that you would even think about digging. Destroy that soil structure, create loads of issues, loads of weeds. You know, I speak to a lot of people who say that they find gardening a chore, or it's a task, or it's really hard because they're weeding half the time. And I understand, but equally, yeah, just don't dig. Just don't dig. Mulch, whether it's a windowsill planter or your backyard, or I'm just lucky enough to have this space, and I steward it the best I can. But yeah, just start.